Hi, everyone. I am so excited. Tri-Synergy Counseling today is featuring local Spanish-speaking therapists who also identify as being Latinx. And I am Victoria Valdez from Tri-Synergy Counseling. I'm the owner and founder and operational director. And today I get the pleasure of actually highlighting a master's level counseling intern for Tri-Synergy Counseling. Julissa, I'm so excited to have you, Julissa. Julissa has a bachelor's degree of social work, and she is currently, excuse me, she is currently oh, I told you I wasn't going to do this, and I did. I have to start over. I didn't have the Word doc open.
This
And I was like, shoot, she's a master of what?
masters of.
Okay. See, I told you it was going to be me. Okay. We're going to do an awkward pause. Hi, I'm Victoria Valdez from Tri-Synergy Counseling, and I'm so excited because we are featuring for Latinx Heritage Month. We are featuring local Latin or Latinx Spanish-speaking therapists. And today I get the privilege of introducing you guys to Julissa, who is actually a master's level counseling intern at Tri-Synergy Counseling. And Julissa has a bachelor's of social work, and she is currently working on her Master's of Science in Social Work degree and working towards becoming a clinician herself. So, Julissa, please take this time to introduce yourself to us and tell us about yourself.
Hello, thank you, Victoria, for having me here today. And as she said, I am a student at University of Tennessee, Knoxville here in Nashville, and I'm hoping to become a clinical social worker. And I have my past history and education is in social work as well. But with social work, you can do so many things, and I'm just trying to do the clinical route and do more things with mental health, especially with the BIPOC community and providing Spanish therapy, hopefully in the future.
That's awesome. It's super exciting. Whenever I talk with master's level clinicians, master level counselor interns, I always remember my days when I was in the same boat as you and learning and providing therapy as I'm learning techniques, right? So super exciting stuff. So tell us a bit. So I'm a marriage and family. My master's was in marriage and family therapy. And so I'm curious, tell us a little bit about the social work field in summary.
So social work is a bit confusing because everybody's like, you guys probably just do case management. But no, with social work, I think the main mission is to meet people where they're at and hopefully accomplish their goals, whether it is like one-on-one, in groups, in big organizations. And I'm doing the one-on-one route. So you can do policy, you can do clinical, you could do mental health, you can do domestic violence. There's different environments and different, like, I would say, like, topics that you could do social work in. It's just a matter of like, oh, I am here for my clients and for the patients, and I'm trying to be an advocate. I'm trying to be a broker, a therapist, an educator, and that's what I'm trying to do with Victoria now. Just hoping to be a clinical therapist within the social work perspective, which values human connection and values that everyone has a strength and everyone has resiliency.
I love that. And I love when you talked about some of the beliefs of what people think social work is, because I also too was like, oh, they're just caseworkers, right? And so like learning about everything that you guys do and the value of the lens of the education of social work. And if I may, please correct me if I'm maybe off on anything. I also really love the emphasis as I'm learning from you and your school the justice, like a lot of focus on advocating for clients even outside of the therapeutic room, and the social justice layer is a very high value, which I really appreciate. Did I get that right on like the idea of social workers?
Yes, yes. I would like to think social work as something that's like 360. Like a person is not just their mental health, but also like other aspects of their life you really need to consider, and just thinking about where does the client go to school, or where does the client what does the client like to do, what have they done in the past. That is just the social work mindset, thinking at a very micro level. That's what we would call it, like working with individuals.
I love that. It makes me, when I learned about kind of the way that the lens and the eyes of what social workers look through when working with families and clients, it makes me think of the marriage and family therapy, how we look at the whole family system, the micro, and then the macro level of the outside of the family system in the home. What other systems are in place? What is the school system? What is the community system? Right. And so it's really, I feel like it's really similar in those areas. It's interesting.
Yeah, because sometimes there are things that we as clinicians can't can't do much about, but what can we do? Like there's like advocacy, we can vote. There are things that we can do. Obviously we can't, like for example, if you think about like DACA, like we can't remove the barriers and the restrictions, but we could always provide mental health services and consider, oh, they're going through this hardship, and how can I be more aware of how I interact with this patient? Like, okay, I understand that this is stressful. Like I cannot remove DACA from your life, or because that's in place. That's a policy, that's a that's a systemic barrier for them.
Yeah. And for anyone watching, DACA is Deferred Action for Earlyhood or Child or
Childhood arrival.
thank you, earlyhood childhood arrivals, right? So those are um, individuals who came to the United States under the age of 16, I believe.
Yes.
Before the year 2012, that they arrived as children. They may be in their 30s now, some of them, but they're at the time of their arrival, they were under the age of 16, and that is a policy in place in the United States that allows them to work legally and have access to school and other things, and kind of protects them from being harassed for deportation. Although we know that sometimes some of that was still going on. And of course, if they committed a very serious crime, then it did not DACA did not protect them from that. But just so in case anyone wondered what that was, that is kind of what DACA is. And I love how you highlighted that, because that was a great example of how that is a policy that is in place that allows these individuals to take care of themselves, sustain themselves and their families, and the mental stress around what happens if that gets taken away, right? And all of those layers. So I love that you talked about that. But kind of segueing, this is all exciting topics. I wanted to know, share with us what led you to choose the route of social work, becoming a counselor, a mental health provider.
I think being a daughter of immigrants has impacted what I do today. Just seeing how like different agencies like Tennessee Justice for Our Neighbors, Turk, a lot of like local agencies that have helped my parents, and I was just like, and they helped me in a way, because there's a connection, there's a flow of help, a chain of help, and I realized that I wouldn't be here without them. So I wanted to see I want to work with people, I want to help people, but how? Like there's different ways. And when I got to college, there was this really helpful professor who just helped me understand that you don't have to be a doctor to help people or heal people. There's different forms of healing, and one of the routes was common that was psychology, but I enjoyed the social work route more because you do take psychology courses or you do emphasize on psychology, but with social work there's so much more. Like, and I'm a very curious person, and I was just like, I love to learn about different things about people, and there's a cultural perspective, a psychological perspective, there's a physiological perspective. All of these are I think is very important to consider, and that we also have like a very, I think there's ethics too, and sometimes I like to know that what I'm doing is, what the field that I am is being intentional about helping people, and not just helping us helping them, but them helping themselves. So having that efficacy is very important for me too. So I realized I am in the right spot because it's not just about the power flowing from one professional to a client, but it's this interconnection. Like, it's, oh, I see that you have a strength in this. I have resources for that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's work together to make a treatment plan or a plan to like continue your efficacy and your ability to reach your goals and wherever you need. So it just, in whatever level, because social work, you can be in social work in every level. But that's when I started learning about that, I was so amazed by it, and that's why I decided to do social work, just because of how I think holistic is the word, how holistic it is. So,
Yeah, all the lenses, right? Or like the systems that we're looking at and the whole person and everything that interacts with them, right? So I love that. That is so awesome. I love hearing about what led people to become on the, on the road to clinicianhood, right? Or being a therapist, very fancy. But so yes, I love that. I love that. Okay. And so tell me, so I know that, right, counseling, master level counseling interns, we're figuring ourselves out still, like the populations maybe, and we have an idea. What do you want to really, like, what do you feel passionate about serving the community? What specific population or any of those type of things?
well, I have a background in working with students ages 5 to 18 in my undergrad, um, in a school environment. So I did a lot of social emotional learning, and I absolutely loved it. And I realized that I wanted to focus more on mental health, and specifically working with the BIPOC community and the Spanish speaking community, just because I identify as a Latina and I speak Spanish, and I realize that there is a gap with the ratio of Spanish speaking, potential Spanish speaking clients and therapists, that there are more clients than there are therapists. And I was like, okay, there's I have this knowledge, I have this degree, I want to be able to extend it to the population in need. And that's how I decided that, okay, I think I'm currently still trying to figure it out, but it looks like I'm more focused on like children, like ages 5 to 18, and looking at their family system. So that's what I see myself, who I see myself, sorry, working with. But it might change, but for now that's what I'm focusing on.
Yeah, I love that. I share that with you, in that when I was working on my undergrad bachelor's degree, I always knew I wanted to work with kids. My first thought was I wanted to be an attorney for kids. And then after my first year of college, I was like, I'm not. I changed my mind. For like 6 years. I wanted to be a children's attorney. And so I always knew I wanted to work with kids. And then while I was working for my undergrad, I worked a lot at residential treatment centers for kids in foster care. And I saw the cycle. They were in therapy, and then they'd go back to their families, and then they'd kick them right back out. And I don't mean their families would kick them right back, just the wheel of the system of, they came into treatment, they were feeling better, and then they went right back out with the family, and then to the family system, things happened again, and now here they are back at square one again. And that's what made me go, wow, like I wanted a profession that where I could address not just the kid, but everything, like or the system, family system, because I saw that they were doing great in treatment and they'd go back home and it would fall apart. And so that's why I was like, oh, I need, some type of family style, right? And which is why I chose. It was a hard decision though, Julissa, because I really liked social work too, and I took some social work classes while I was getting my degree in psychology, and then went to my master's in marriage and family therapy. But to say that, I remember I thought I was going to do couples, and I learned later that I didn't like doing couples. I thought that I would. So, right. So I appreciated your like, I'm passionate about this, but I might find myself doing other things too. Right. So I loved hearing about that. And I loved your experience working with that population and the social emotional, because it's such a huge piece to our mental health is developing, especially with kids, right? Like, and teens, developing that social emotional intelligence for themselves, and that awareness for everyone else, and how much that's such a huge importance for our mental health, for our well-being. So I love that you already have that experience from the get-go, right? As you're coming into this season. Tell me a little bit about, you talked about you already have some experience working with social emotional. Is there anything that you're really wanting to learn how to treat in the mental health? Like, some therapists, like I specialize a lot in anxiety and have extra training on that. Is there something that you're like, wow, I really want to work with this type of mental health? I'll work with everything, but I really like feel passionate about this.
Something that I have like a lot of interest in has been trauma, and the effects of it has on the body, how it affects the effects it has on the body. I didn't understand you hear people passively saying, I got trauma from this, and it's just like, hold on, we need to trauma is a big word, and it means a lot. Like, we need to I feel like that's another conversation. But in undergrad, we always had this perspective of being trauma informed and what it meant to be trauma informed, because everyone experiences some form of trauma, whether it be a little T trauma or a big T trauma, and everyone experiences it. However, how we interact with the world, how we interact with each other, and being more trauma informed, being more aware of the fact that not everyone has had a safe space or has been able to be brave in the spaces that they've been, like whether it being school, being like the work field, anywhere. So I've always been very interested in that since undergrad, and currently I'm trying to understand it more in the clinical route, and learning more. I'm really interested in learning more about how do I provide therapy for someone who is in trauma, whether it be a little one or a big one, or like how do I interact with a mother versus how I interact with their child about the same trauma they've had. So I have the knowledge. Now I want to know. Now I want to do like the doing of like, how do I do it? So that's where I'm at right now. There's many other things that I'm interested in, but that's, I think, what I'm interested in, because it's like I have the knowledge of how to be trauma informed, but how do I provide trauma informed therapy? Like, how do I navigate that route? So I'm like translating how being trauma informed in schools is like to how to be a therapist that knows about trauma and how to heal with a client, and on and on and on. So it's just like I'm translating two different environments now.
Right. And translating and applicating, right?
Yeah.
As you go, right? Yeah. That was definitely for me something that when you talked about trauma, I loved. It brought me back to like how it took me a couple of years to really hone in what felt authentic to me, that was in a modality, that was a type of therapy that felt good for me, for my culture, and that I knew was like research based, that would also support them, right? And so for me, I remember there was a learning curve on like which one of these works the best and for which client and for feels good for me. And so I know that you'll develop that as well, and that's going to be really helpful for people. So what are some are there any, as you've been learning, and specifically the population that you're wanting to work with? You talked about BIPOC and Latinos or Latinx community. Is there any things that you learned research-wise or stats that you could share with us about the Latinx community, maybe specifically to the population you want to work with?
Yes, one of the populations I have experience working with and will be working with in this with Victoria is the Latina adolescent community. And in my undergrad, I realized that there was a gap between like being culturally and linguistically aware and providing the social emotional learning program. And within my senior capstone, I started reading about the program, the agency that I was at, and they did a big study to analyze how well their program is positively affecting like the different demographics. And one of them was the Latina girls. And so I was just like, okay, this is interesting. Let me keep reading. And I saw that they found out in their study that 52% of Latina girls, adolescent meaning between ages, they defined it between 10 to 18, were using illicit drugs. And I was like, okay, as a social work perspective, I always understand that that might just be the tip of the iceberg. So what is below that? So I took that statistic and I did my literature review, and things I kept pulling up in my literature review was that there was different mental health issues behind the illicit drug usage. And a lot of it was actually anxiety and depression, and that anxiety and depression leading to suicidal ideation. And I was like, that is very hard to hear. And I was like, why is that? Why is that? So I kept digging and kept researching, and a lot of it has to do with like just machismo, the machismo culture, the culture of like, oh, you're a woman, this is how you should be, da 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 da. Like, girls are just meant to be in the kitchen. Like, I think there's still this culture in the Latinx community that we still don't view women or girls the way they should be or treated. And if you just want to look at it globally, how in Mexico right now, there's a lot of feminicides going on. And so if you think of it in a global perspective, like, oh my goodness, like how does that translate to girls, like when they're not women yet? And that's scary.
Yes.
One of those reasons is just hate on women, hate on girls, and that's awful. That's scary. And I can't imagine how the girls are still developing like their sense of self and their sense of like, this is who I am, this is how people are treating me, like, and you're internalizing that, and they're still learning how to cope with their feelings, their frontal lobe is still developing. So there's a lot of things still developing, and there's a lot of negative things being put into them. And so it's just like, okay. And then it kept going. I kept seeing things like also racism, just being in the United States, being a minority, that culture of like not being wanted in a space or in school. And it was really important for me in my study to understand how culture is actually a protective factor, and how like protecting the language, protecting the culture, protecting the girls in the school setting like recognizing that they are Latinas and they should be recognized for who they are and their culture, and not just, and make sure that the practices they're using in the agency that I was in was culturally and linguistically aware that, okay, mom and dad don't speak English, so they
Right.
cannot fill out the paperwork. Okay, I see that you are signing the paperwork. There's that culture of being hyper independent. Like,
Right. And then if I may, and then you see other people like, wow, look how hyper independent, look how mature they are, look how they can handle so much and it's really praised versus like, well, they're doing it because they have to.
yes.
Hmm.
And obviously, like in that agency that I was part of, they want to participate in like other programs to like have fun and see other girls, and like, because we're people are social, like we
Drive off
connect,
the community.
we desire community.
Yes.
So that's what I found out in my past research, and just talking about how in-school programmings are amazing, are great for Latina girls. It's just a matter of like being culturally and linguistically aware,
Mhm.
and providing them a space to like express themselves and be willing to just talk about their experience. I think I forgot what one of the agencies that I read about, like in my literature review, did this activity where there were these Latina girls who were able to express in writing, like in a social and emotional group in a school, that were able to participate in writing and write their poetry about their experiences and
Mhm.
share with one another. And in the agency that I was at, we do that, but we don't provide the cultural perspective. And I was like, we need to do that. We need to be aware of that. And I tried to educate the agency that I was at with my capstone, and hopefully open their horizons a bit and understand that Nashville is a big community. It's becoming a big community, especially in the Hispanic, Latinx community. So we need to open our services a bit more to the population, the minorities that are in our schools.
I love that I love so many things. I wanted to highlight that, like, I love your curiosity, you're genuine, and that's a really great therapeutic skill to have, is the curiosity. When you talked about, like, I wanted to know more. Okay, yes, we've got this stat, but why? What are some of the under, the right? You talked about the tip of the iceberg. What is underneath the iceberg? What is driving them to, cope with drugs, right? And so I loved your curiosity, and you were chasing that answer of knowledge of like what, and exploring that, right? I also loved how you highlighted um, agencies talking, being culturally and linguistically aware. And that kind of like segued me into the next question, was that for therapists that are watching this, that are not that do not identify as Latinx, um, and are working with Latinx populations, because you're right, here in the state of Tennessee, there are not nearly enough Spanish speaking or cultural, even if there are therapists that do speak Spanish, there might not be there definitely is not a lot of therapists who are identified as Latinx, right? So have that cultural component as well. So dire need, right? Like you said, there's more population than there is Spanish speaking therapists, right? So with that being said, what are some tips that they can consider when working with the Latinx population, that they could be tips, things they should be mindful of, or strategies, or cultural considerations? Like, what do you think?
First, the first thing that comes in mind is that if you ever have a Latinx, Latino patient, is that they are brave to be in your space, just because I can't imagine the amount of hoops they've had to go through to be there with you. So recognizing that they are resilient and brave to be in your clinic, or whatever space that you're in, I think is very important to recognize that to celebrate that they are there, that they're here and they're willing to heal. So giving them that sense of safety and trust. And I think the second thing would be, when working with Latinx, have try to do your own research. I think it's very important that you hear do your own research, but be intentional with it. Like, take it global if you need to. Okay, my client is from Mexico. What type of therapies are they doing in Mexico? And
I love that.
So I think it's very important to have an eclectic an eclectic background of okay, I'm going to do CBT all the time is not going to be helpful for a client. So being for every client, especially if you're trying to change a type of belief or a thought, you have to recognize that certain beliefs and thoughts are cultural, and maybe your idea of a good belief or core belief is not the same for them. So I would be very intentional in research and be culturally aware when it comes to interventions and therapies.
I love that. I was excited. Yes, I love when I hear people, because also I always have to remind other clinicians that may not identify with the BIPOC population that we are being trained by westernized American systems. And so, and not, they don't necessarily have the cultural context in mind when they're teaching these modalities to us, and so, right, having that intentional clinical lens of exploring the culture. And I loved when you said take it globally, research what kind of therapies are they doing in Mexico, right? I loved that so much. All of the things that you had to say were great, but I was like, oh, that's real good. I liked that. Awesome. Was there anything you wanted to add? Because I know I jumped in the comment.
I think I would stick to those three. Just celebrate that they're there. Be intentional with your research. And then 3, be culturally aware of the therapies and interventions you're using now. And comfort does not always equate progress for any type of demographic. Just using the same for each demographic is not going to get you or your client anywhere, in my opinion.
I love that. I was, because it's Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month in September, there was a local conference, and I was curious at viewing the local conference and trying to look at the speakers if they were going to have any BIPOC specific suicide interventions or prevention. I didn't have the answer to that at the time. I didn't see any specialized talks or trainings on that. And so at the time, there may be some now. But how important is yes, we have this great tool on suicide prevention, for example, but how can we specialize it for our BIPOC community? Because it's not a one size fit all. There can be a great prevention strategies or modalities that we're using for therapy, but like you said, considering that it might not be applicable for everybody, right? And so meeting them where they're at. I love that. Thank you so much for that. What about, so I always ask therapists or therapists in training, all of it, no matter what, this question, I love this question, for anyone that is from a background or a family culture that maybe is not so therapy friendly, right? What I mean by that is maybe they're oh, you shouldn't go to therapy, or therapy's for crazy people, or they have a view of if you go to therapy, that means there's something terribly wrong with you, right? Or something, have those type of non-friendly therapy or not therapy friendly ideas. What is your advice to them on why they should give therapy a try?
I have a social work background, so we know that there are different forms of well-being, and the most common place that you go is to check your physical well-being to the doctor. So you go to the doctor, you get checked, and hopefully you're okay. However, there's so many aspects to just being a human. Like there's the spiritual one. You go to church to make sure, or wherever you practice your spirituality, to make sure that you're fulfilled, right? And
Right.
just like those two common ones, specifically, like we're in Tennessee, like it's very, very religious, spiritual state, and we need to do the same thing to our minds and to our emotions. Like we need to water our brains and make sure that they're healthy and they're growing. So I would tell you to give your brain and your mind and your emotions a try. Try to make sure, check on yourself. How are you doing? Like just like, oh, my arm hurts. Okay, I have been hurting for the last few days because of this and that and that. I need to get this checked. I want to feel better. How can I do this? How can I heal from this? So I would say give your brain a chance. And your brain has so many things to do with your emotions and your mind, and I would say just it's very hard, and I get it. It's very difficult because you're in an environment that tells you, oh, this is not healthy. Oh, you're crazy. But they have their emotions too, and we all that's what makes humans so amazing, is that we have emotions. We can express ourselves. We can do this. We can do that. However, we need to check on our mind and our brain, and that happens through therapy and being able to process what you're going through and how you're feeling and how to better interact with the world around you. So please give it a chance.
I love that, Julissa. I love that so much. I just wanted to say that I appreciate you so much, and I'm so excited that we had this interview. I can't wait for just to hear back from people about what they learned, and the therapists that are and all the people that are going to see this. And so thank you so much for being with us, Julissa. And we will stay tuned for next time. Julissa will be doing more things for Tri Synergy. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.